Well, hello and welcome to this study on the Gospel of Luke. Today in this video, we're going to be looking at the first 3 chapters, which is pretty crazy thing to do because there's so much packed in here. This is sacred scripture, and I do not presume by any means to know all of the stuff that's in here or even be able to explain that all to you in a short video. But we're going to be looking at the first 3 chapters. Before I do that, I want to give just a brief introduction to the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. One of the best ways to do this is to contrast it or juxtapose it with the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew was written especially for Jews, people who were ethnically Jews who had become Christians, and trying to understand how being a Jew, a true Jew, meant now they needed to follow Jesus. Luke, on the other hand, is an orderly account written especially to an audience made up largely of Gentiles, people who were ethnically not Jews, but who were Christians. And so the questions that Luke deals with relate to how these Gentile Christians understand the Old Testament, how they consider their place in the story of the people of Israel, and also how they are to relate to the Roman rulers and authorities and culture that they're living in, right? So they're looking both ways, at the Jews and at the Romans. We're going to see this throughout Luke. He's very careful to notate the current Roman rulers and the current high priests. This theme of kings and priests is going to come up again in our study. One of the other main things that people talk about in the Gospel of Luke is that it's focused on the poor, on the lowly in society, and on women. So Luke, for instance, doesn't have the magi, the wise men coming to visit Jesus, bringing him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Matthew is more focused on the kingly components, but it's really cool because gold, frankincense, and myrrh feature in a very kind of subtle way in Luke. Zechariah goes to offer incense at the altar of incense, which has gold, and he's offering frankincense and myrrh. So really neat how that all works out. Last thing I'll say about Luke generally is that he's very, very intentionally trying to write a story. He said this is an orderly account, which means everything in there is there for a reason. We need to pay attention. It's masterfully written. The Greek in Luke is normally regarded as the best, the highest quality Greek in the New Testament. Very, very nice and well written. And he does a really good job of writing a story. So we need to read it as a story. There's lots of little clues that are fun. Jesus in the manger is wrapped in strips of cloth. Jesus at his burial is wrapped in strips of cloth. That kind of stuff is throughout this gospel. Now, today, for the rest of this video, there's no way I can cover everything. Not even going to try to. I want to focus on something that I think is going to be most interesting and exciting, I hope, for you. It's certainly been that way for me. I want to focus on the genealogy of Jesus. And there's a lot of names. I want to focus on names and think about what these names mean and who they represent and the stories connected. Again, Luke is writing a story, but this story is nested within a much bigger story of God's people and what God is doing. So again, the best way to one of the best ways to approach the genealogy in Luke is to compare it with the genealogy in Matthew, and there are differences. The first is order. The order. In Matthew, he lists Abraham first. And Luke reverses that order. The reason being probably is because Matthew's writing to Jews who mainly care, they think, okay, we know Abraham, who's this guy Jesus? The audience of Luke is saying, we follow Jesus, who's this guy Abraham, right? So it's reversed. In addition to the different order, Luke goes all the way back to Adam, because Abraham is the father of the Jewish people in Matthew, and goes back to Abraham. In Luke, the genealogy goes all the way back to Adam, the father of all people, including the Gentiles, and this shows the universal scope of salvation that Luke is trying to get at. Women are a notable feature in the genealogy in Matthew, which is really interesting because they are the main Gentiles in that genealogy, which is how Matthew is showing Gentiles need to be included. The structure is very different. Matthew has 3 kind of groupings of 14, which is the numerical value of David's name in Hebrew, which is very significant. Luke doesn't do that. Probably the most significant and maybe concerning difference is the names listed, the names given between David and Jesus. They're different, very different except for a couple names. This is not new. This is not something that if you see a YouTube video on this exposing something Christianity, it's not new. Be careful of those YouTube videos out there. Christians have known about this for thousands of years. The church fathers have written about this. And the general consensus, which I think is the correct one, is that the genealogy in Luke is the genealogy of Mary. And there are lots of different reasons for that. I can't go into too much detail, but basically in Luke 3:23, when it says Jesus was the son, as it was thought, of Joseph, son of Heli, that's going to show that Jesus was not biologically connected to Joseph, of course. Jesus was in the womb of Mary. But Joseph, as the son of Heli, was probably a son-in-law because they didn't typically list women in these genealogies. And another overwhelmingly kind of common thought about this that Christians have been saying for thousands of years is that this focuses on kind of the priestly dimensions of Jesus's work and who he is as a person, whereas Matthew is especially focused on the royal, kingly dimensions. We get the sense of this priestly dimension all over the place. It's crazy. Luke, the gospel, starts in the temple. It ends in the temple. We have Zechariah going to the temple to offer sacrifice. We have Jesus as a baby coming to the temple. Jesus as a boy spending time in the temple. It is all over the place. Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth are described as both being in a priestly line of Levi and of Aaron. And so it's very clear. And of course we have Mary being the cousin, being related to Elizabeth. So Mary's genealogy, it appears, is also in the line of David, coming from Nathan rather than from Solomon. But she's also connected to this Levite line, which shows Jesus as the true ultimate priest and also the true ultimate king descended from David. Now, this is really interesting because even though we're in the New Testament, it's kind of some leftover stuff coming from the Old Testament. We see Zechariah and Elizabeth depicted as the best version of what Israel could be. They were holy, they were righteous, they were waiting for God to work, and they were nobodies. Zechariah, it was very uncommon to be called to Jerusalem to serve in the temple. There were thousands of priests, and extremely uncommon to be the one selected. His name was pulled out of a bucket to be the one to go into the presence of the Lord. And so they were waiting and expectant. And this recalls a couple stories. So in Luke we have the birth of Jesus and the birth of John. And these two women, Mary and Elizabeth, would have reminded people, and they're supposed to remind us, of two women in the Old Testament, especially Sarah and Hannah. Sarah was an old wife, just like Elizabeth was, who was barren, but ultimately her child, Isaac, becomes the seed of Abraham. Hannah was also barren, and she was being abused because of that. She goes to the temple and she's praying for a son. Her son is Samuel, who becomes the first priest. And kind of is acting like a prophet, the first good priest, I should say. He's preparing the way, Samuel's preparing the way for the first king, Saul, who fails. Now, if we look into some more of the names, we're going to focus on the genealogy in Luke. It's really fascinating what we see. We have in verse 23, I said Heli. This is actually just a different way to say the name Eli, which takes us back again to that story of Hannah, because Eli was a priest at the temple at Shiloh. His sons were wicked. They were bad. Eli was not doing a good job. He was a bad father. He let his sons do bad things. His sons failed. Eli failed. But Joseph, as the probably son-in-law of Heli here, Eli, succeeds. This is a recapitulation, is what the theological term is, of where Old Testament failed, because Joseph is an excellent husband. When Mary becomes pregnant, the law said that she should have been stoned. And people were probably thinking horrible things about Mary and Joseph, but Joseph takes her and he protects her. He cares for her. If it wouldn't have been for Joseph, Jesus would not have been born, because Mary would have been stoned, most likely. So this mention of Eli in the genealogy in Luke takes us back to that story of Eli and his wicked sons. Hannah going to the temple, praying for a son, and her son comes and is a priest. Samuel says, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Very similar to Mary's response to the angel. It says in Samuel that the boy Samuel grew up in the temple, and he was growing in favor with God and with man, and the Spirit was with him. Very similar statements in Luke chapter 2, verse 40 and verse 52 about Jesus growing in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and with people. So these echoes are meant to remind us of the old priesthood that was insufficient. And of course, the son of Zechariah and Elizabeth in this story, where we have the birth of Jesus and the birth of John the Baptist before, is meant to remind us, take us back again to the Old Testament and these old stories that the people are connected in, that we as Christians today are connected to. It says in Luke that John is going to be in the power and the spirit of Elijah. They're both depicted in very similar ways in the art. They both have crazy hair. They're both in the desert, in the wilderness, wearing crazy clothes, eating weird stuff. They both have disagreements with the rulers. For Elijah, it was Ahab and Jezebel. For John the Baptist, it's Herod, which also ultimately gets him killed, right? He's beheaded. But John the Baptist is the last Old Testament kind of prophet, preparing the way for Jesus, who's going to be the true fulfillment of everything the Old Testament is pointing to. We're going to see in a couple weeks how Jesus is depicted as a new Moses leading his people somewhere. A few other names that I want to talk about here, and those are Simeon and Anna, but it's actually, you guessed it, Hannah, from the story in 1 Samuel, just a different version of that name. Simeon is another guy. So we see in the genealogy in Luke, the name Levi pops up twice. It's not in Matthew, but Simeon in the Older Testament, I should say, really, is the brother of Levi, and he's very violent. And in the story, he avenges the rape of their sister Dinah. Levi, of course, is the one who becomes the priestly family. But here, Simeon is hanging out in the temple, and he's talking about peace, and he's very peaceful, and he's saying, "Look, this baby is going to bring peace." And it's a reversal of what we had in the Old Testament, or it's a fulfillment of what the Old Testament was searching for. And of course, Anna is in the temple, hanging out, fervently praying, just like Hannah was fervently praying for a son, Samuel. So there's all these connections. I could go on and on and on about all the things that these different names mean. Every name has a story, and it's meant to remind us, and especially the readers, saying, "Hey, look, go back and remember the story of this person. They were God's people. They tried, but they did not succeed. They failed. Jesus fulfills everything." And that's really the way I'd like to end this video. There's so much I didn't cover, but the way I would like to end this video is that Jesus is depicted in Luke as the fulfillment of everything, the center of everything. And so these Gentile Christians who are new, they're trying to figure out, they're looking to the Romans, and they're trying to figure out what's going on here. And Luke has some references to Augustus. The way that Augustus was announced and talked about is the language that Luke uses to talk about Jesus. The language that's used by the Jews about a person from the Davidic line, a priestly person is applied to, a royal person is applied to Jesus, who is the true king and the true priest, the ultimate fulfillment. Where everybody else failed, Jesus succeeds. Right after the genealogy, of course, which is for next week, Jesus goes into the desert for 40 days and recapitulates where Israel failed in the desert for 40 years. So that's the thing I want us to center on. Jesus is everything. Jesus is the fulfillment. He's the center of it all. He really, really is. And there's no limit to the amount of depth and the meaning that is in the person of Jesus because, of course, he's God in the flesh. The other thing I want to say is that there are a lot of characters in the story who were nobodies. They were humble. They were poor. Luke goes out of his way to say that Joseph and Mary can't afford the right sacrifice for Jesus. And they were waiting and humble. Zechariah was a nobody. He wasn't expecting to be called to the temple in Jerusalem. But because they were waiting and expectant on the Lord, God was able to use them. And I want to say that as an encouragement to us as we're part of this story of God's work. If we can be righteous and obedient and humble, then God will allow us to play a unique and special part in his story. So I think that's really awesome. That's all for now. I'm going to end it there. I hope this has been helpful. Look forward to studying more about this with you very soon. Bye.